Hi, I'm John Walter, and this is my submission for our first assignment in EDL 850 School of Law. Originally, I'm from Garden City, Kansas, down in the southwest corner of the state, but I've been living in Manhattan, Kansas since 2013 when I graduated with a bachelor's degree in secondary education with endorsements in English and journalism. I'm proud to be a certified journalism educator through the Journalism Education Association, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through the Masters of Instructional Technology program here at Fort Hays and hope to graduate at this time next year. My hobbies and interests include film photography, live music, running and cycling, nonfiction and long-form journalism, and spending time with my nephews. So I'm getting ready to have a new one who will be born in the next couple of months. For my professional experience, I currently serve as the Assistant Director of the Collegian Media Group. We are a nonprofit publisher of student media at Kansas State University, and specifically I'm the advisor for the Royal Purple Yearbook, Manhattan Magazine, the collegiate newspapers, photography staff, and our IT support staff. Previously, I was a high school teacher at Junction City High School in Junction City, Kansas, where I spent 5 years teaching journalism and advising their student media. I advised the yearbook and an online news website. I really enjoyed my time at Junction City because it was a career academy campus focused on smaller learning communities, where I served as the audiovisual communications pathway leader. And it was a unique place to work because the high school supported the Fort Riley Army base, so there were constantly students coming and going, and students who'd lived all over the world, which was really interesting. So for Module 1, the 3 levels of government control, we're first going to look at the levels of support that the federal government provides. For a little bit of background, the Department of Education was established in 1867 to help establish more effective school systems. It supported the land-grant universities, shout out to K-State, the first land-grant university, and was intended to support vocational education in agricultural, industrial arts, and home economics. During World War II, we saw the expansion of federal support through impact aid laws for military-connected communities, of which I'm familiar with because of my connection with Junction City High School and the Fort Riley Army base, and then as well as the GI Bill. In 1958, Congress passes the National Defense Education Act in response to the Soviet Union and Sputnik. They provided college loans, and emphasis on STEM improvements, foreign language instruction at the K-12 level, and additional support for vocational training. In the 1960s and 70s, there was an emphasis on the department's equal access mission. We saw laws passed such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX, Section 504, Title I support for low socioeconomic communities, and the Higher Education Act. In 1980, Congress established the Department of Education as a cabinet-level agency, and the department serves nearly 50 million students attending public and private K-12 schools across our nation. So the support that the federal government provides to schools is pretty limited. Their involvement, they're not involved in the day-to-day operations. They primarily provide federal funding, which accounts for 10% of government-run school operating costs. They provide funding and grants based on meeting certain conditions and requirements, such as the title provisions, FERPA, and they enforce protection against discrimination through federal legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX, IDEA, and they ensure students that are not denied equal educational opportunity. At the state level, state governments exercise the primary accountability and oversight for government-run schools. The states establish, implement, and enforce their own educational standards, so it's a more localized state-level standards that each state decides on based on kind of their state needs. And on average, state-level funding accounts for slightly less than half of schools' operating costs. States typically delegate much of their authority to local school districts. So at the local level, local entities are responsible for the accountability and operation of government-run schools. The state departments of education form local school districts that act as those local entities. So the responsibility is deferred from the federal level to the state level to the local level, and each school district is governed by a school board whose members are elected or appointed by local officials. Federal and state funding accounts for slightly more than half of school funding, and local school boards are responsible for finding the rest. They find the rest of their funding through the collection of property taxes within school districts, and as a result, funding reflects complex variables and the overall affluence of the community. So lower socioeconomic communities tend to have less resources in their school districts than more affluent school districts. For educational leadership at the federal level, Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education within the Department of Education. She's responsible for all aspects of the department and advises the president on educational issues. It is a paid position. At the state level, Dr. Randy Watson is the Kansas Commissioner of Education, who serves as the CEO of the Kansas Department of Education. They establish standards and frameworks of evaluation, provide funding. His position is also paid. At the local level, local school boards are comprised of elected officials. They're often volunteers who hire a school district superintendent who serves as the CEO of the school district. Dr. Reginald Watson at USD 475, where I worked, was our superintendent, which is a paid position. Those local entities, the school districts, are responsible for funding, accountability, and the operation of schools, establishing curriculum and personnel decisions. So, which level has the most power? I think that because most of the authority and decision-making processes defer down to the local bodies, I believe that the school districts have the most power and impact on how education is administered. The local funding through the tax base has a large impact on the educational resources of those schools, and the local authority to meet the school, state, and federal mandates. They kind of implement their own vision to meet upwards those federal mandates that are coming from the top down. So when we look at the standards component 6.1, evaluating and developing, implementing management, communication technology, school-level governments, operational systems that support each student's learning needs, promote the mission and vision of the school. I think that local school districts comprised of their Board of Education, superintendent, and building administrators have the most influence over school-level governance, which I believe is the key term here. They are the decision makers at the local level. For component 6.2, evaluate, develop, and advocate for data-informed and equitable resourcing plan that supports school improvement and student development. I think this is a combination of all three levels of leadership that have influence over this component. At the federal level, compliance with laws ensures equitable access to education for all students and establishes a baseline. At the state level, leaders set the state standards and evaluations for schools to meet those federal frameworks, and at the local level, leaders determine the implementation and operation of systems that support this component to meet federal mandates and state mandates. In component 6.3, effectively evaluate, communicate about, and implement laws, rights, policies, and regulations to promote student and adult success and well-being. I think that federal and state policymakers have the most influence over this component because they are responsible for the implementation of laws, rights, policies, and regulations through the legislative process. I think that the implementation of laws is the key term here. Local leaders are the ones that are tasked with complying with such laws and regulations. So I think that the federal and state policymakers have the most influence over this component. So how does all of this support the well-being of our students? At the federal level, they help establish laws and policies that ensure equitable access to educational services and a baseline for education across the nation. Compliance with these regulations allows schools to receive federal funding. At the state level, they establish standards and educational practices that provide a framework to comply with federal policies as well as their own state mandates, and they provide state-level funding. And at the local level, they're primarily responsible for the operation of local schools and school districts and the accountability of complying with state and federal policies. The local leaders are responsible for establishing the curriculum, hiring personnel, and the daily operation, and local funding is acquired through the collection of property taxes within the local school districts. So that is all that I have. Thank you for listening and watching. Looking forward to leaving some comments on everybody's assignments, and looking forward to learning with you over the next several weeks. Thanks.